Well, how about Jeremiah? How are you doing?
I'm doing very good. Just getting the prayer pulled up right now, and then we can get started. So I believe we are streaming, and I think we have. We're just waiting on one more person to join the Zoom.
So, Sandra, do you want to say the opening prayer?
Yeah, sure. Oh my God, thou seest me in my lowliness and weakness, occupied with the greatest undertaking, determined to raise thy word among the masses and to spread thy teachings among thy peoples. How can I succeed unless thou assist me with the breath of the Holy Spirit? Help me to triumph by the hosts of thy glorious kingdom and shower upon me thy confirmations, which alone can change a gnat into an eagle, a drop of water into rivers and seas, and an atom into lights and suns. O my Lord, assist me with thy triumphant and effective might, so that my tongue may utter thy praises and attributes among all peoples, and my soul overflow with the wine of thy love and knowledge. Thou art the omnipotent and the doer of whatsoever thou willest.
Thank you so much for reading that. Now, share presentation. Everyone see the presentation now?
I do.
Okay. Wonderful. So we've been going through exploring America and the Most Great Peace. Let's see, what's the next one? And this is part 6. So this is from 1903 to 1913. Test for the American Bahá'í. Abdul-Baha visits America, paragraphs 19 through 27. Okay, so we're going to be going through quite a few paragraphs. And we're not going to make it through all the paragraphs today, are we, John?
What's your question?
Are we going to go through all paragraphs?
We're going to finish part 6 today.
Okay.
So we're going to finish this section here, part 6. And then that is going to be paragraphs 19 through 27. Well, whatever is on this PowerPoint for today, we're going to finish it.
Okay. So paragraph 19. Well, let me pull up. Paragraph 19. I'm going to pull up Ocean, and I'm going to have Ocean read. Okay.
Yeah, very good, very good.
That's a lot of paragraphs.
It is, but I wasn't sure if this is if there were fewer paragraphs we had read previously. So, but we'll try. Let's see. Ocean. Sure. Okay, everyone see the program?
Yeah.
Can you see that text? But you know what? I probably didn't do the audio.
Yeah, that's readable.
Does it need to be bigger, Scott, or is that okay?
Well, either that, I've got the book in front of me also, but yeah, that would be fine.
Okay.
It was through these pilgrimages, as they succeeded one another in the years immediately following the ascension of Baha'u'llah, that the splendor of the covenant, beclouded for a time by the apparent ascendancy of its archbreaker, emerged triumphant amidst the vicissitudes which had afflicted it. It was through the arrival of these pilgrims, and these alone, that the gloom which had enveloped the disconsolate members of Abdul-Baha's family was finally dispelled. Through the agency of these successive visitors, the greatest holy leaf, who alone with her brother among the members of her father's household had to confront the rebellion of almost the entire company of her relatives and associates, found that consolation which so powerfully sustained her till the very close of her life. By the forces which this little band of returning pilgrims was able to release in the heart of that continent, the death knell of every scheme initiated by the would-be wrecker of the cause of God was sounded.
All right. Sorry. Should we stop at each paragraph?
Yeah, I would if you can, just so that if someone wants to talk about it.
Well, Jeremiah, we've got the PowerPoint to go look at. So if you go back to the PowerPoint, we go to the next slide. There's reflections on the slide.
Well, the next slides are the more paragraphs. So should we, that's honestly, do you want to go through all the paragraphs first? Or, I mean, I can try and jump to the first slide for the paragraph, but it's
No, we can just go on reading it. As I just want to follow with what the PowerPoints are. And if the PowerPoint is next slide, we're going to read. Let's just do that. So does anyone have any reflections on this past paragraph?
I think it personally, I think it was important, I think for sure, for me reading these initially that a long time ago, but then again, coming back to these in my older years, reminding me how important it was for what the greatest holy leaf was able to do for Shoghi Effendi, and for prior to that, even though a helpmate, if you will, for his brother, and that's not something that I think some people have really thought about. Maybe I think her name is kind of lost to some people at the very beginning, and yet there's they think of Abdul-Baha maybe, but she certainly was an important aspect. And then when later on Shoghi Effendi is here, she took the reins, as we'll find out. It really helped him. A really important portion of our faith.
Yeah, she kept the unity of the faith together until Shoghi Effendi took over.
That's definitely something to reflect on. Bahia Khanum and her time without Abdul-Baha, without Shoghi Effendi, and this transition period, especially for the whole family. I think it's a good idea, Jeremiah, we move to the next paragraph.
The tablets which were subsequently revealed by the untiring pen of Abdul-Baha, embodying in passionate and unequivocal language his instructions and counsels, his appeals and comments, his hopes and wishes, his fears and warnings, soon began to be translated, published, and circulated throughout the length and breadth of the North American continent, providing the ever-widening circle of the first believers with that spiritual sustenance which could alone enable them to survive the severe trials they were soon to experience.
Always so much foreboding.
I'm so sorry. Could I ask you a question?
Yes.
Sorry. Is this pre-recorded? Because when I, for example, checked something on my WhatsApp, I just noticed that when, for instance, someone is doing Zoom with YouTube, it cuts off. So is the reading of that on divine justice recorded? And then how is this done?
Well, this is the book has an audio recording, and this
Okay.
and I'm just playing the specific parts.
It makes all the sense in the world. I thought someone was reading it.
No, not right now. We
Okay.
could. I mean, if people wanted to read, that's fine as well. But
No, I thought it was very nice reading, very good reading.
so what about this last paragraph?
So it's really important to highlight that Shoghi Effendi bringing the context of the writings of Abdul-Baha into play, that they were now being translated, published, and circulated throughout the North American continent. The writings of Abdul-Baha were not as widely publicized just by virtue of it being in a different language. So the Westerners, as was described in the previous sessions about Shoghi Effendi's description of the circumstances, the writings of Abdul-Baha were not translated. So the Westerners didn't really have a lot of writings to go off of. And then also you had the defects, the defections of people like Ibrahim Khairullah, who brought a lot of people to the faith, and in general, the misinformation that had been widely circulated. So with these new believers coming finally to the Holy Land to see Abdul-Baha and coming back with that new energy from the Holy Land, the writings of Abdul-Baha were ultimately to be translated and published. And by the time Abdul-Baha's passing had occurred in 1921, the believers in the West were at this point able to translate and publish and circulate these writings, such as the Last Will and Testament of Abdul-Baha, which becomes relevant with the passing of Abdul-Baha.
Okay, we'll continue on to the next paragraph.
The hour of that unprecedented crisis was, however, inexorably approaching. Evidences of dissension, actuated by pride and ambition, were beginning to obscure the radiance and retard the growth of the newly born community, which the apostolic teachers of that continent had labored to establish. He who had been instrumental in inaugurating so splendid an era in the history of the faith, on whom the center of Baha'u'llah's covenant had conferred the titles of Baha's Peter, of the Shepherd of God's flocks, of the conqueror of America, upon whom had been bestowed the unique privilege of helping Abdul-Baha lay the foundation stone of the Bab's mausoleum on Mount Carmel. Such a man, blinded by his extraordinary success and aspiring after an uncontrolled domination over the beliefs and activities of his fellow disciples, insolently raised the standard of revolt. Seceding from Abdul-Baha and allying himself with the arch-enemy of the faith of God, this deluded apostate sought by perverting the teachings and directing a campaign of unrelenting vilification against the person of Abdul-Baha to undermine the faith of those believers whom he had, during no less than 8 years, so strenuously toiled to convert. By the tracts he published, through the active collaboration of the emissaries of his chief ally, and reinforced by the efforts which the Christian ecclesiastical enemies of the Baha'i revelation were beginning to exert, he succeeded in dealing the nascent faith of God a blow from which it could only slowly and painfully recover.
So it's important to reflect on this. What we just read, as we mentioned, we were talking about these people such as Abraham Khairullah, and where it had stated in this last paragraph, he who had been instrumental in inaugurating so splendid an era in the history of the faith, on whom the center of Baha'u'llah's covenant, Abdul-Baha, had conferred the titles of Baha's Peter, of the shepherd of God's flocks, of the conqueror of America, upon whom had been bestowed the unique privilege of helping Abdul-Baha lay the foundation stone of the Bab's mausoleum on Mount Carmel. This person, Abraham Khairullah, such a man, blinded by his extraordinary success and aspiring after an uncontrolled domination over the beliefs and activities of his fellow disciples, insolently raised the standard of revolt. This person, Abraham Khairullah, described by Shoghi Effendi here, had committed a terrible act against the faith and made it even worse by allying himself with the center of sedition, the arch enemy of the faith of God, which was sadly, one of the siblings of Abdul-Baha, the half brother. And Jeremiah, can you share his name, that person? Mirza Muhammad Ali. Thank you so much, Sorosh. Mirza Muhammad Ali.
And I mean, John, this seceding slides, when we do get to them, they're going to have all this information in it. So, I mean, I don't think we need to go line by line with each of these paragraphs. I just think we need to read through them up to 27, and then we can start. Does that make sense?
Well, it's a matter of consultation. Scott wanted the opposite of what you're asking for. So it depends on what the group wants. So if the group wants to read through it and then go over it, if they want to go over pieces of it while they go through it, we're flexible, whatever the group wants. So Scott, do you want to do what Jeremiah was suggesting, or do you want to go over some of it while we're going through this?
It doesn't matter to me. I'm open to what the group is. When we've been doing a lot of letters with the House of Justice and things, we've been going through a paragraph at a time or something. So I'm open to anything, whatever the group wants.
I think the middle ground is a good idea. I think it's good to bring about all the diverse ideas we have. Jeremiah has a good point. Since we're going to be going through it, we'll be getting some content to cover these. But I think it's also good as another item of being a little thorough, as Scott mentioned, just reflecting on these passages. If people have reflections on these passages that may come in handy, mnemonics are very important, mnemonic devices. Being able to remember the paragraph you read when you go back over it, it's important. So as someone finds something that's impressionable, please share it. I think that's a medium way to go between these.
May I ask if you said that there's some sort of visual to reinforce the
There is.
content? Could we by any chance just see the visual and then so as to maybe ground us in a different way and then come back to the reflections? Is that possible?
Yeah. Let's see. Sure.
Okay.
So if someone would like to read this, any volunteers?
Sure. So this is America and the Most Great Peace, the letter that we were reading from the World Order of Baha'u'llah. I think it was the fourth or fifth one. So paragraphs 19 through 27. Baha's Peter, Ibrahim Khairullah, seceded from Abdul-Baha, allied himself to the arch enemy of the faith, Mirza Muhammad Ali, and reinforced the efforts of Christian ecclesiastical enemies of the faith were beginning to exert. This caused a transitory cleavage in ranks of American Bahá'ís. The masters sent 4 deputies to lay the foundation of administration. I think we talked about this a little bit last time. I watched the recording over the past few days, and I think Ehsan was talking about this a little bit.
Who put these slides together?
I think Ehsan.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Isam Bayat is the one who's put a lot of this program, this entire program together.
Right.
And usually when he can make it, he's here to lead the discussion. But today we're trying to do the best we can without it.
Good.
So I'm sure the next page will kind of go into it. I feel like we should go back to the paragraph and read the next paragraph before we go on to the next pages.
Sure.
Could you go back one more time? I'm so sorry. Just really
fine.
quickly, I want to see something.
It might be worth noting that there's the accent mark. This says Mirza Muhammad Ali, so that there needs not be an accent mark on that A. And according to the conventions by the Guardian, there would be a dot under the H in Muhammad.
Okay.
Yeah. Should I keep reading?
Yeah. In a second, Saba, are you?
Yes,
finished?
please.
Are we reading this or are we going back to the
Next.
letter?
Actually, we'll go to the next slide and we'll finish out the points.
Sure. In response to internal and external tests, Abdul-Baha inaugurated the precursors of permanent, official administrative institutions, the Chicago House of Spirituality, Baha'i Publishing Trust, Green Acre Fellowship, and the incorporation of Baha'i Temple Unity. American pioneers opened new territories in Great Britain, France, Germany, China, Pacific Islands, and Japan. Calls, should I keep reading?
I think it's best that we go back to the paragraph because these are going to be, when we go back to this, the key
All right.
points from this paragraph.
Cool.
So Jeremiah, if you could take us to the last paragraph we left off.
I need not dwell on the immediate effects of this serious yet transitory cleavage in the ranks of the American adherents of the cause of Baha'u'llah. Nor do I need to expiate on the character of the defamatory writings that poured upon them. Nor does it seem necessary to recount the measures to which an ever-vigilant master resorted in order to assuage and eventually to dissipate their apprehensions. It is for the future historian to appraise the value of the mission of each of the 4 chosen messengers of Abdul-Baha, who in rapid succession were dispatched by him to pacify and reinvigorate that troubled community. His will be the task of tracing, in the work which these deputies of Abdul-Baha were commissioned to undertake, the beginnings of that vast administration, the cornerstone of which these messengers were instructed to lay, an administration whose symbolic edifice he at a later time was to found in person, and whose basis and scope the provisions of his will were destined to widen.
So what reflections do you all have on this paragraph that we just read? I want to call attention to this sentence. It is for the future historian to appraise the value of the mission of each of the 4 chosen messengers of Abdul-Baha, who in rapid succession were dispatched by him to pacify and reinvigorate that troubled community. I find that interesting when Shoghi Effendi says these things because of the vast nature of the things that these people do. I believe Mirza Abul Faris was one of the people who came to America. Can anyone name any of the other 4 chosen messengers of Abdul-Baha?
No, John, I don't, because you got the only one I remember you mentioned.
All right, we'll find out later then. Very good, very good. Okay.
I was actually looking at the same paragraph. I can't name any of the other 4, but or any others of the 4, but this brings to mind last time when Ehsan was talking about the disciples of Abdul-Baha and how we will need to commemorate them or their the places where they rest, they're laid to rest. And I know, I think Thornton Chase, we are soon to be commemorating his passing. I received an email about it, and I think he's laid to rest in Inglewood, California. Yeah, I can't find. Anyways, yeah, Robert Turner, we are also commemorating him.
Yes, Inglewood Cemetery. Yes.
Right. So Thornton Chase Memorial is gonna be in a couple of weeks, September 26th, 2021, Inglewood Park Cemetery. And I think I support what Hassan was saying about each one of these historic figures needs to be commemorated in a special way, and each one of them will, I think, one day have a very special gravestone or something where they can. It's a special, very important. We don't really understand the significance of them, but yeah, that's what this is for the future historian. I can't see the screen anymore, but it is for the future historian, I think, to appraise the value was it? Of the mission of each of the four chosen messengers of Abdul-Baha. So I think we still don't understand what the value is. And I don't know if we can. It's still very significant. But each of the disciples of Abdul-Baha, I think their mission, it is for the future historian to appraise the value of their missions. So, oh, okay. Yeah, so Mirza Abul Fazl was indeed. So this D would also have a dot under it. I guess it might be hard to format. But I can, should I read this? I'll read it. So the four chosen messengers of Abdul-Baha. Four successive messengers dispatched by Abdul-Baha. Haji Abdul Karim Tehrani, Haji Mirza Hassan Khorasani, Mirza Asadullah, and Mirza Abul Fazl succeeded in rapidly dispelling the doubts and in deepening the understanding of the believers, in holding the community together, and in forming the nucleus of those administrative institutions which 2 decades later were to be formally inaugurated through the explicit provisions of Abdul-Baha's will and testament. So lots of accent marks missing, but that's good to know.
Very nice. Thank you.
Any idea where the four individuals were in America, or did they travel around?
All I know is that Mirza Abul Fazl definitely visited Green Acre Baha'i School. And it was, before Abdul-Baha was there. Mirza Abul Fazl was there. That's all I know. So East Coast, at least. I'm pretty sure that's probably just the East Coast for Mirza Abul Fazl, but I can't speak more about the others.
Let's go ahead and we'll go back and continue reading.
Suffice it to say that at this stage of its evolution, the activities of an invincible faith had assumed such dimensions as to force, on the one hand, its enemies to devise fresh weapons for their projected.
Jeremiah, we can't see the text on this page. I'm sorry, you got to make it somehow visible to us.
I'm sorry about that, you guys. Here it is. You should see it now. My apologies.
Suffice it to say that at this stage of its evolution, the activities of an invincible faith had assumed such dimensions as to force, on the one hand, its enemies to devise fresh weapons for their projected assaults, and on the other, to encourage its supreme promoter to instruct its followers through qualified representatives and teachers in the rudiments of an administration which, as it evolved, would at once incarnate, safeguard, and foster its spirit. The works of such stubborn assailants as those of Vetralski, Wilson, Jessup, and Richardson vie with one another in their futile attempts to stain its purity, to arrest its march, and compel its surrender. To the charges of nihilism, of heresy, of Mohammedan Gnosticism, of immorality, of occultism and communism so freely levelled against them, the undismayed victims of such outrageous denunciations, acting under the instructions of Abdul-Baha, retorted by initiating a series of activities which by their very nature were to be the precursors of permanent, officially recognized administrative institutions. The inauguration of Chicago's first House of Spirituality, designated by Abdul-Baha as that city's House of Justice, the establishment of the Baha'i Publishing Society, the founding of the Greenacre Fellowship, the publication of the Star of the West, the holding of the first Baha'i National Convention, synchronizing with the transference of the sacred remains of the Bab to its final resting place on Mount Carmel, the incorporation of the Baha'i Temple Unity, and the formation of the Executive Committee of the Mashriq al-Askar. These stand out as the most conspicuous accomplishments of the American believers, which have immortalized the memory of the most turbulent period of their history. Launched through these very acts into the troublesome seas of ceaseless tribulation, piloted by the mighty arm of Abdul-Baha, and manned by the bold initiative and abundant vitality of a band of sorely tried disciples, the Ark of Baha'u'llah's covenant has, ever since those days, been steadily pursuing its course, contemptuous of the storms of bitter misfortune that have raged and which must continue to assail it, as it forges ahead towards the promised haven of undisturbed security and peace.
So we see a little bit about I guess these are some of the religious clerics who start to actually rise up in the community against the teachings of the faith.
That sounds correct.
It's sad for Reverend Jessup to see him, both his name in 1893 be the person that the human being to bring the first name of the name of Baha'u'llah first to the American shores, and yet then a decade later maybe be amongst the named as a stubborn assailant of that same the faith of Baha'u'llah. Interesting.
Well, this is not this one. Let's see. View of 23. Two. I kind of feel like I'm going to, if it's all right with you guys, I know we want to go back and forth, but honestly, I don't know what's coming up ahead. So I'd rather we go through, listen to the rest, and then we'll go back through the slides one after the other once we do with that, if that's okay. Just because I don't know what's ahead in this presentation. Otherwise, I feel like I'm going to be chasing nonstop.
Sure.
Sounds good.
Unsatisfied with the achievements which crowned the concerted efforts of their elected representatives within the American continent, and emboldened by the initial success of their pioneer teachers beyond
No one can see your screen.
in Great Britain,
I should know that because it's orange. I'm sorry, you guys.
Unsatisfied with the achievements which crowned the concerted efforts of their elected representatives within the American continent, and emboldened by the initial success of their pioneer teachers beyond its confines in Great Britain, France, and Germany, the community of the American believers resolved to win in distant climes fresh recruits to the advancing army of Baha'u'llah. Setting out from the western shores of their native land, and impelled by the indomitable energy of a newborn faith, these itinerant teachers of the gospel of Baha'u'llah pushed on towards the islands of the Pacific and as far as China and Japan, determined to establish beyond the farthest seas the outposts of their beloved faith. Both at home and abroad, this community had by that time demonstrated its capacity to widen the range and consolidate the foundations of its vast endeavors. The angry voices which had been raised in protest against its rise were being drowned amid the acclamations with which the East greeted its recent victories. Those ugly features that had loomed so threateningly were gradually receding into the distance, furnishing a still wider field to these noble warriors for the exercise of their latent energies.
I will say something that it seems very grand in its portrayal. Like just this bit is what to me sounds like an incredible movie. Setting out from the western shores of their native land and impelled by the indomitable energy of a newborn faith, these itinerant teachers of the gospel of Baha'u'llah pushed on towards the islands of the Pacific and as far as China and Japan, determined to establish beyond the furthest seas the outposts of their beloved faith. There was some way to actually get a hold of those specific stories. I think they would make very good stories. So.
The faith of Baha'u'llah in the continent of America had indeed been resuscitated. Phoenix-like, it had risen in all its freshness, vigor, and beauty, and was now, through the voice of its triumphant exponents, insistingly calling to Abdul-Baha, imploring him to undertake a journey to its shores. The first fruits of the mission entrusted to its worthy upholders had lent such poignancy to their call that Abdul-Baha, who had just been delivered from the fetters of a galling tyranny, found himself unable to resist. His great, his incomparable love for his own favored children impelled him to respond. Their passionate entreaty had moreover been reinforced by the numerous invitations which representatives of various interested organizations, whether religious, educational, or humanitarian, had extended to him, expressing their eagerness to receive from his own mouth an exposition of his father's teachings. Though bent with age, though suffering from ailments resulting from the accumulated cares of 50 years of exile and captivity, Abdul-Baha set out on his memorable journey across the seas to the land where he might bless by his presence and sanctify through his deeds the mighty acts his spirit had led his disciples to perform. The circumstances that have attended his triumphal progress through the chief cities of the United States and Canada, my pen is utterly incapable of describing. The joys which the announcement of his arrival evoked, the publicity which his activities created, the forces which his utterances released, the opposition which the implications of his teachings excited, the significant episodes to which his words and deeds continually gave rise, these future generations will no doubt minutely and befittingly register. They will carefully delineate their features, will cherish and preserve their memory, and will transmit unimpaired the record of their minutest details to their descendants. It would indeed be presumptuous on our part to attempt at the present time to sketch even the bare outline of so vast, so enthralling a theme. Contemplating, after the lapse of above 20 years, this notable landmark in America's spiritual history, we still find ourselves compelled to confess our inability to grasp its import or to fathom its mystery. I have alluded in the preceding pages to a few of the more salient features of that never-to-be-forgotten visit. These incidents, as we look back upon them, eloquently proclaim Abdul-Baha's specific purpose to confer through these symbolic functions upon the firstborn of the communities of the West that spiritual primacy which was to be the birthright of the American believers. The seeds which Abdul-Baha's ceaseless activities so lavishly scattered had endowed the United States and Canada, nay, the entire continent, with potentialities such as it had never known in its history. On the small band of his trained and beloved disciples, and through them on their descendants, he, through that visit, had bequeathed a priceless heritage, a heritage which carried with it the sacred and primary obligation to arise and carry on in that fertile field the work he had so gloriously initiated. We can dimly picture to ourselves the wishes that must have welled from his eager heart as he bade his last farewell to that promising country. An inscrutable wisdom, we can well imagine him remark to his disciples on the eve of his departure, has in his infinite bounty singled out your native land for the execution of a mighty purpose. Through the agency of Baha'u'llah's covenant, I, as the ploughman, have been called upon since the beginning of my ministry to turn up and break its ground. The mighty confirmations that have, in the opening days of your career, rained upon you have prepared and invigorated its soil. The tribulations you subsequently were made to suffer have driven deep furrows into the field which my hands had prepared. The seeds with which I have been entrusted, I have now scattered far and wide before you. Under your loving care, by your ceaseless exertions, every one of these seeds must germinate. Every one must yield its destined fruit. A winter of unprecedented severity will soon be upon you. Its storm clouds are fast gathering on the horizon. Tempestuous winds will assail you from every side. The light of the covenant will be obscured through my departure. These mighty blasts, this wintry desolation shall, however, pass away. The dormant seed will burst into fresh activity. It shall put forth its buds, shall reveal in mighty institutions its leaves and blossoms. The vernal showers which the tender mercies of my heavenly Father will cause to descend upon you will enable this tender plant to spread out its branches to regions far beyond the confines of your native land. And finally, the steadily mounting sun of his revelation, shining in its meridian splendor, will enable this mighty tree of his faith to yield in the fullness of time and on your soil its golden fruit.
Wow, that's impressive. Like I started getting concerned there because there was quite a bit of foreboding with the winter analogies. But I always love how in the faith, always to the end, even in these short paragraphs, there's always that, that glimmer of hope. And finally, in the steadily mounting sun of his revelation, shining in its meridian splendor, will enable this mighty tree of his faith to yield in the fullness of time and on your soil, its golden fruit. So, I mean, all right, so let's go ahead and open up this screen share. Okay, you should see the screen, correct?
We see the desktop.
How'd that happen? What about now?
Yep.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, so part 6, 1903 to 1913, test for the American Baha'i. Abdul-Baha visits America, and we just heard paragraphs 19 through 27. So I don't think we're gonna just go. And now we're gonna start here. You already read, but we'll redo this again. Baha's Peter, Ibrahim Harallah, seceded from Abdul-Baha, allied himself to the arch enemy of the faith, Mirza Muhammad Ali, and reinforced the efforts of Christian ecclesiastical enemies of the faith, who were also beginning to exert their influence. This caused a transitory cleavage in ranks of American Bahá'ís, and so the master had to send 4 of his deputies. And then in response to the internal and external tests, Abdul-Baha inaugurated the precursors of permanent official administrative institutions, the Chicago House of Spirituality, Baha'i Publishing Trust, Greenacre Fellowship. So does this mean this is when the school was created or just the fellowship? Does anyone know?
That's a good question. I have a book called Greenacre on the Piscataqua. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but that's the name of the river it's next to. And I'm sure the answer can be found in there. But I want to think that Greenacre School had already been established. So by Sarah Farmer. So I think this might be my guess is this is something different.
Okay. And incorporation of the Baha'i Temple unity. Now, what is the Baha'i Temple unity? Is that's the temple?
This was the committee formed as a precursor to the National Spiritual Assembly of the United States and Canada, formed with the task of establishing the temple. Yeah. So the house of worship in Wilmette.
And then American pioneers opened new territories in Great Britain, France, Germany, China, Pacific Islands, and Japan. So these are new territories, and it was the American Bahá'ís that influenced that. Very cool. And so these are the major key points. Sorry, I'm going to try and move this down. America, so these are more key points, I guess. Calls for this visit from believers and the public. Indescribable spiritual significance of Abdul-Baha's visit. Purpose of his symbolic acts. Confer spiritual primacy on American believers. Parting message of Abdul-Baha prepared believers for severe tests. It was through these pilgrimages, as they succeeded one another in the years immediately following the ascension of Baha'u'llah, that the splendor of the covenant, beclouded for a time by the apparent ascendancy of its archbreaker, emerged triumphant amidst the vicissitudes which had afflicted it. It was through the arrival of these pilgrims, and these alone, that the gloom which had enveloped the disconsolate members of Abdul-Baha's family was finally dispelled. Through the agency of these successive visitors, the greatest holy leaf, who alone with her brother among the members of her father's household, had to confront the rebellion of almost the entire company of her relatives and associates, found that consolation which so powerfully sustained her till the very close of her life. By the forces which this little band of returning pilgrims was able to release in the heart of that continent, the death knell of every scheme initiated by the would-be wrecker of the cause of God was sounded. Shirosh, I have a question. Or to John or anyone, do I need to
Sure.
go over these words, the definitions?
I
Sure.
personally, I don't need them, but I mean, I know the red words the next slide is probably talking about those. Okay.
So the archbreaker, Mirza Muhammad Ali, archbreaker of the covenant of Baha'u'llah. Mirza Muhammad Ali, 1853 to 1937, second surviving son of Baha'u'llah, born in Baghdad. His mother was Mehdi Ullah. Anyone want to help me out here?
I think it might be Mahde Olya.
Mahdi
Mahde Olya.
Ullah.
Yeah.
In his early teens in Adrianople, he advanced claims to divine revelation, for which he was chastised by his father. He rose to prominence as a transcriber of Baha'u'llah's writings. His father named him Ushan Akbar, the greatest branch, and in the Kitabi Book of the Covenant, appointed him to be second in succession after Abdul-Baha, who was 9 years his senior. Despite
So you say Husna Akbar.
Husna,
Husna.
Gusna Akbar. Despite the support of Jamal Baruji,
Yeah. Borujerdi. That's hard. So the first U is like an O. Borujerdi. Yeah.
Boru Jeridi.
Good.
Very good.
Thank you.
Perfect.
And so, despite the support of Jamal Barujerdi in Iran and Ibrahim Harala in the United States, he was unable to gain extensive support amongst the Bahá'ís. He was able to alienate the majority of Baha'u'llah's family from Abdul-Baha. However, In this, he was principally supported by his brother-in-law, Mirza Majaddin. He sought unsuccessfully to gain the leadership of the Baha'i community after Abdul-Baha's death. Shoghi Effendi described him as the archbreaker of Baha'u'llah's covenant. Okay, would you, Shirosh, would you be able to read this?
Sure. The greatest holy leaf, the supreme woman of the Baha'i dispensation. Eldest daughter of Baha'u'llah by his first wife, Nawab, and Abdul-Baha's full sister. She was devoted to Baha'u'llah, Abdul-Baha, and Shoghi Effendi, and on several occasions acted Bahia Khanum with Shoghi Effendi before I think it should be he left to study in England as head of the faith. She was only 6 or 7 years old when her father was imprisoned in the Siyahjal in 1852, and thereafter shared the poverty, exile, and sufferings of Baha'u'llah's family. So I think she must be 1 or 2 years younger than Abdul-Baha.
Right.
Dedicated to serving her father, she renounced the idea of marriage. In Akka, 1868 to 1909 or 10, she managed the affairs of the household, attended to her father's daily needs, and cultivated social relationships with the wives of local notables and officials, which might shield her father and brother. In the aftermath of Baha'u'llah's passing, she led the minority of family members who supported Abdul-Baha against the machinations of Muhammad Ali and his associates. With the end of the government's restrictions on the family in 1908, though already poor in health, she received the increasing number of Baha'i pilgrims from both East and West. And during Abdul-Baha's Western tours from 1911 to 1913, she assumed management of Baha'i affairs in the Holy Land. During World War I, 1914 to 1918, she superintended with her brother the distribution of considerable amounts of food, clothing, and material aid to a local population suffering both from maladministration and potential starvation. After Abdul-Baha's death in 1921, she supported and advised the youthful Shoghi Effendi during the early years of his guardianship, and during his several prolonged absences from Haifa, acted as head of the faith. In the late 1920s, her health suffered further decline. She died at the age of 86, 1 hour after midnight, on July 15, 1932, from respiratory failure, and was buried on Mount Carmel.
So she took care of things while Abdul-Baha traveled, for the most part, when he had to go teaching.
Yeah, and I think it said also when Shoghi Effendi was traveling, during several absences from Haifa, she was acting as head of the faith. Very impressive.
Wow. So this is review of paragraph 20.
So the word unequivocal, I think, is good to stress. Plain, explicit, obvious, unmistakable. Unequivocal, plain, explicit, obvious, unmistakable. That is the meaning of unequivocal. Sustenance, nourishment, provisions, and rations.
All right, maybe. So the tablets, which were
subsequently revealed by the untiring pen of Abdul-Baha, embodying in passionate and unequivocal language his instructions and counsels, his appeals and comments, his hopes and wishes, his fears and warnings, soon began to be translated, published, and circulated throughout the length and breadth of the North American continent, providing the ever-widening circle of the first believers with that spiritual sustenance which could alone enable them to survive the severe trials they were soon to experience. So this is paragraph 21. The hour of an unprecedented crisis was, however, inexorably approaching, relentlessly, unalterably, unavoidable. Evidences of dissension actuated, start, trigger, activate, set in motion by pride and ambition were beginning to obscure the radiance and retard the growth of the newly born community, which the apostolic teachers of that continent had labored to establish. He who had been instrumental in inaugurating so splendid an era in the history of the faith, on whom the center of Baha'u'llah's covenant had conferred the titles of Baha's Peter, of the shepherd of God's flock, of the conqueror of America, upon whom had been bestowed the unique privilege of helping Abdul-Baha lay the foundation stone of the Bab's mausoleum on Mount Carmel. Such a man, blinded by his extraordinary success and aspiring after an uncontrolled domination over the beliefs and activities of his fellow disciples, insolently, means rudely, disrespectfully, and impertinently, raised the standard of revolt. That's wild. That's so sad. Like, I can't even imagine what it was like to be in Abdul-Baha's presence, let alone, like, I can't imagine. I vaguely think it'd be neat to have, had a conversation with Shoghi Effendi, but even then, I don't think I'd want to, only because I've always felt like he's been the most strict in the in the central figures of the, like, as in regards to how Baha'is should approach understanding the central figures of the faith, like the reverence of Shoghi Effendi towards the teachers it's intimidating only because he's human, right? So I feel like there's an aspect that like I would be I'm not trying to like elevate his station or anything.
Let me put something in the mix. There's a subject of the Holy Family and those who ultimately didn't become, they became covenant breakers. They left the protection of the covenant. The difference between two kinds of people, the Holy Family and the people who were covenant breakers in the Holy Family, and particularly one of the things that Shoghi Effendi really exemplifies is his adherence to duty and the respect for Baha'u'llah as their Lord. The fact is that you could view Baha'u'llah, if you're the son, the daughter of Baha'u'llah, you could view him as your father. because again, biologically, he was their father. But in the same respect, Abdul-Baha, Bahia Khanum, Mirza Mehdi, these holy personages, they saw Baha'u'llah as their Lord. Baha'u'llah wasn't merely their father. He was the manifestation of God. So there's a level of reverence that you need to have for the manifestation of God and for the ordinances that the manifestation of God has brought. That comes with humility. And it's ironic in how the society works today that we have the concept of humility that society has, but then there's complete lacking of humility for their one and only God. The humility that we have for God and the humility that we have for a human being have to be extremely different. When you have a certain humility for God, when God says to do something and you believe what you're reading is from God, you do it. And there's no questions. You ask questions to understand, to learn, but you don't ask questions before you obey. So you obey first and you ask questions while you're doing it, so you can understand. And something, at least in America, we've really gotten wrong. It's that when there's a law, you can question things, you can learn about them, but you follow it. If I don't understand why I wear a seatbelt, I still have to wear a seatbelt or I'll get in trouble. Now, how much worse is it when you disobey God? We don't have a sense of entitlement to demand something from God. God demands from us. And that's something that many people, it's very hard for them to understand, and it's uncomfortable for them to understand. So when you talk about Shoghi Effendi and the amount of reverence he gives towards these holy personages, Shoghi Effendi, of course, was himself holy, but Shoghi Effendi is showing us how we should approach these holy personages. We should be acting in that way in our minds, in our honest reflections of ourselves, in our shortcomings, and in our areas for growth. So why should I be humble? Shoghi Effendi is showing us why we should be humble. Why should I obey these holy personages? Shoghi Effendi is showing us what happened with all these people who didn't, and the negative effects it caused on everyone around them. And I can keep going down the list of why. But to describe why, I need to first actually listen and try to have a sense of humility and obedience. So it's kind of a twofold process. You have a growth in your reverence for the faith, but you also have a growth in your understanding of how far you are from what you have to strive for. So looking at this, it shouldn't be a sense of feeling ashamed of meeting Shoghi Effendi. Shoghi Effendi was a Baha'i, so he would be, in his words to you as a person, of course, he would have a position he would have to, be in as a person. But speaking with you, of course, Shoghi Effendi would show you Baha'i traits that you probably wouldn't expect from his writing if you just judge him on his writing. That's why you read books like The Priceless Pearl. You learn about Shoghi Effendi and his personality and all these things. But when Shoghi Effendi is writing in the context of the faith, you have to understand the personality of Shoghi Effendi in the context of the Guardian and Shoghi Effendi as a person. They're two different people. Shoghi Effendi as the Guardian is performing the role of guardian. And we have to understand the writings are from the Guardian. But then when you speak to Shoghi Effendi as a person, you have to understand he also had to follow the same rules all Baha'is have to follow. So he had to have a lot of virtues that you would not find from an authenticated text where we have to follow. You know what I'm trying to say? There's two personas. There's a persona of the role of the institution of the guardianship, and then there's a persona of the guardian as a person. And those two if we feel that there is a unity of the two, we have the guardianship all wrong. The guardianship isn't Shoghi Effendi. The guardianship is the guardianship, and Shoghi Effendi fulfilled the role of the guardianship. Just as Baha'u'llah was a manifestation of God. It's a descriptor of the role that he had to perform. But to say that it's only one, for example, we're going back into the same trap that many Christians have fallen into, saying that Jesus is God, creating this synonymous reality that Jesus is God. Same thing with the guardian. Shoghi Effendi was really, really, really different from all of us. We know this. That's not something to talk about. But the concept of Shoghi Effendi as a person versus Shoghi Effendi as guardian, we really need to learn more about that to understand the difference, because as guardian, he had the divine infallibility that was promised to us as Baha'is, to the Center of the Covenant, to the guardian, and the House of Justice, Universal House of Justice. But from the context of the divine infallibility of Shoghi Effendi as a person, he didn't have that. There's a difference of when he's performing the role of guardian and when he's not. When the House of Justice, 9 members are in session and they're performing the role of the Universal House of Justice, and when they're all separated in their own individual lives. It's an important distinction we have to remember.
Everything was very strict on adherence to the laws of the faith. So he was more strict than Abdul-Baha, actually, in that sense. And he did this because he had to protect the faith. You know, it was something that when Abdul-Baha ascended, there was a lot of damage, potential damage that people were trying to do to the faith. And so we had to make sure that people knew that, you know, he was looking after the faith. He was the head of the faith. And you have to stay in line. There were many things that he was quite strict with. Like he found certain behaviors unacceptable. And there's a reason why, you know, half his family became covenant breakers because of their actions and what they did. I'm not saying that he shunned them immediately. He gave them a lot of chances, but them and some others, you know, there was strict adherence to the high standards which he kept, and this was even as Shoghi Effendi himself. So it's something that, yes, he wasn't infallible in his own kind of right, but as an institution, but he maintained everything that he was meant to maintain. Anyway, it's difficult for me to speak at the moment because I do have COVID. But
we hope you get better.
Thank you.
I hope you're quarantining and everything. I wish you the utmost health, and thank you for this contribution, Payam. Thank you.
Thank you for contributing.
Yeah, just what that out there. So yeah, carry on.
And to put on that point what Payam mentioned, I really recommend everyone who wants to learn more about this role of the guardian and his personal life that you read Priceless Pearl. It's a book written by Shoghi Effendi's wife, Ruhiya Khanum, Abdul-Baha, Ruhiya Khanum. Yes, that book. Soros has it up. If you want to unmute Soros.
It looks like this. It's green. Great book. Lots of info and relevant pictures.
Sorry about that. Just speak again so that the thing actually zooms in on you, my phone.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so this is the book. Looks like this. I think they all look like this. This is a photograph of Ruhiya Khanum, the author of the book. It's a great book. Lots of detail.
Agreed. And this book, when you read it, Priceless Pearl, you'll learn a lot from it because you'll see this distinction between the guardian as an institution, and of course him as a person, and really his humility, his devotion, and all the virtues he exemplified as a human being. And of course he was not a normal human being like us in a lot of ways, but that's something for another class.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to the continuation of paragraph 21. Scott, would you mind reading this?
Sure. Seceding from Abdul-Baha and allying himself with the arch enemy of the faith of God, this deluded apostate sought by preventing the teachings and directing a campaign of unrelenting vilification against the person of Abdul-Baha to undermine the faith of those believers who he had, during no less than 8 years, so strenuously toiled to convert. By the tracts he published through the active collaboration of the emissaries of his chief ally, and reinforced by the efforts which the Christian ecclesiasticals, enemies of the Baha'i revelation, were beginning to exert, he succeeded in dealing the nascent faith of God a blow from which it could only slowly and painfully recover. I did go back into the different words we could. Deluded being misled, conned and fooled. Duped, hoodwinked. Apostate means abandons or vows of faith. Traitor, renegade. Perverting is corrupting, debasing, and misusing. Unrelenting is remorseful, remorseless, insistent, pitiless, inexorable. Vilification against Abdul-Baha is the criticism, slander, disparagement, libel, and backbiting. For 8 years, he strenuously or vigorously, tirelessly, and energetically and doggedly pursued. The tracts are different articles, pieces, or treatises, and pamphlets. Emissaries are representatives. Can't see that. Yeah, okay. Then finally, nascent is budding, promising, and emerging.
Thank you. Okay. This is review of paragraph 22. It says, I need not dwell on the immediate effects of this serious yet transitory cleavage in the ranks of the American adherents of the cause of Baha'u'llah. Transitory is fleeting, passing, briefly, momentary, cleavage, split, divide, fissure. This division in the ranks of the American adherents to the cause of Baha'u'llah. Nor do I need to explicate, which is expound, elaborate, expand, amplify, or elucidate on the character of the defamatory writings that poured upon them. So the insulting, offensive, slanderous, and libelous. Nor does it seem necessary to recount the measures to which an ever vigilant master resorted in order to assuage and eventually to dissipate their apprehensions. So vigilant is watchful, alert, weigh, observant, heedful. Assuage is lessen, tone down, ease, alleviate, dissipate, squander, waste, throw away, fritter away, and apprehensions, anxiety, worry, dread, and hesitation. Continuing on paragraph 22, it is for the future historian to appraise the value of the mission of each of the 4 chosen messengers of Abdul-Baha, who in rapid succession were dissipated by him to pacify and reinvigorate that troubled community. His will be the task of tracing in the works which these deputies of Abdul-Baha were commissioned to undertake the beginnings of that vast administration, the cornerstone of which these messengers were instructed to lay, an administration whose symbolic edifice he, at a later time, was to found in person, and whose basis and scope the provisions of his will were destined to widen. So who's the his will be the task of tracing? These are the
Teachers.
messengers. These were each of the 4 teachers, right?
Right. Of future historians can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a singular historian, I think you're saying, but it could be multiple ones, but he wrote it that way.
And then let's see, this is America in the Most Great Peace, the 4 chosen messengers of Abdul-Baha. 4 successive messengers dispatched by Abdul-Baha. Haji Abdul Karim-e Tehrani, Haji Mirza Hassan-e Khorasani. You have a question?
He gave me some homework to do this week. I need to find out more about these 4 individuals.
Yeah.
Is the name Nulufar, who had her hand up?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi. No question, just listening.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I thought you had a hand up.
Yeah, sorry, let's go back. So Mirza Asudallah and Mirza Abdul Fazal.
Right.
Succeeded in rapidly dispelling the doubts and in deepening the understanding of the believers, in holding the community together, and in forming the nucleus of those administrative institutions, which 2 decades later were to be formally inaugurated through the explicit provisions of Abdul-Baha's will and testament. Wow. So it's those 4 individuals that help keep it together. Abdul-Baha sent a series of emissaries to America to counter the effects of the covenant breaking and to deepen the believers. Abdul Karim-e Tehrani vainly attempted to save Kerala during his visit to the U.S. between 26 April and the 5th of August, 1900. That's a picture of him. He's a Persian merchant, Cairo.
Oh, okay.
So Abdul Karim Effendi Tehrani of Cairo, Egypt, was the first teacher sent to America by Abdul-Baha. He arrived in New York City in May 1900. He remained there for some time and then came to Chicago, where he was entertained by Dr. C.I. Thatcher in his home at 14 Loomis Street near Monroe Street. Dr. Thatcher had fitted up a hall for meetings in the basement of his house, and all the meetings were held there. Anton Haddad was his translator, and Mirza Rafi also translated some of the time. The addresses of Abdul Karim Effendi given in Chicago, including one given in New York, and also a tablet he had received from Baha'u'llah, were published in a booklet. This booklet was of great value to the Baha'is at that time, as it contained the true teachings and caused the removal of conflicting ideas concerning the cause then prevailing in America. He made a trip to Kenosha, Wisconsin to meet the Baha'is in that city. He gave addresses and held interviews for inquirers. A group photograph of the Baha'is with Abdul-Karim Effendi and his party standing on the veranda was taken in front of Dr. Thatcher's house. Abdul-Karim Effendi was a venerable and dignified appearing man and wore the Oriental robes and turban. Abdul-Baha sent a series of emissaries to America to counter the effects of the covenant breaking and to deepen the believers. And this is Haji Hassan-i Khorassani, November 1900 to mid-July or August of 1901. Let's see, this is Mirza Asudallah Isfahani, 1826 to 1930, Abdul-Baha's brother-in-law. He was responsible for transporting the remains of the Bab from Iran to Haifa. He later became a covenant breaker along with his son, Dr. Amin Farid. He was in the States from 4 November 1900 to 12 May 1902. But before he became a covenant breaker, he was one of the ones that was sent to actually teach the the faith in America.
Yeah, he actually also went to go to his son to like guide him, but he became like him.
Wow.
He followed him.
Haji Mirza Hassan. Wait, so this is about what he did, kind of. Let's see. Okay, so Isfahani. Khorassani, also of Cairo, Egypt. With Mirza Asudallah of Haifa, Palestine, and Mirza Hussein Rahi, a school teacher of Cairo, who acted as their interpreter, arrived from the Holy Land. They were the bearers of a tablet from Abdul-Baha, stating that he was sending them to those regions to visit you, that their breasts may be dilated with joy in conversing with you about the love of God. These teachers also wore the Oriental garb. Their talks were taken down in shorthand in Chicago every evening, but were not published. His farewell address was given at the Messianic Temple, Sunday evening, May 11, 1902. So all 1, 2, 3 were kind of traveling together, seems. Abdul-Baha sent a series of emissaries to America to counter the effects. And this is Mirza Abul Fazl Gopani, was born in a village near Golpayan. I'm gonna need John or Amira to help me out here.
Okay, here, look. So you say Gol Pa Ye Gani. Or here Gol Pa Ye Gan.
Golpayani. Golpai
Ye Gan.
Golpaigan in 1844. Abdul-Baha sent Abul Fazl to the United States to deepen American Bahá'ís in the fundamentals of their faith. To this end, he wrote the Baha'i Proofs, translated into English by Ali Quli Khan and published in 1902. Abdul-Baha named one of the doors of the Shrine of the Bab in his honor. Wow. He is unquestionably the most celebrated scholar the Baha'i faith has yet produced. He died 21st January 1914 in Cairo, Egypt. Did not know that about the door. Abdul-Baha sent to America in 1902 the Reverend Mirza Abul Fazl of Golpayangan, Persia. He was accompanied by Mirza Ali Quli Khan, later an attaché of the Persian embassy in Washington, D.C., who acted as his interpreter and translator. The Baha'is had already rented a house on Monroe Street, corner of Loomis, for a headquarters where the activities of the cause were carried on. Here, Haji Mirza Hassan and party Mirza Abul Fazl and all the translators lived at the same time. This was a glorious experience for the friends who gathered there to receive the teachings from these marvelous teachers. Every Sunday, they gave public lectures in halls rented by the believers for Sunday meetings only, as all other activities were held at the headquarters. Interesting. Let's see. Mirza Abul Fazl spent much time in New York, Greenacre, and Washington, returning there after his visit in Chicago. His explanations of the Bible were wonderful, giving from Genesis to Revelation the most voluminous and the most explicit interpretations we have ever received. His talks and lectures were all taken down in shorthand, but we have them only in typewritten form. Also, a large number of his letters to believers and inquirers. These have been carefully preserved by the Baha'is of those early days and have been followed as a basis for giving the message, especially to Christians. He wrote a booklet, The Brilliant Proof, at the command of Abdul-Baha in refutation of an article written by Peter Easton, a Protestant missionary, which was a very false and discourteous criticism of the Baha'i cause. His book, entitled The Baha'i Proofs, was published in 1902. After his departure on January 21st, 1914, another edition was published containing a history of his life, an account of his death, and tributes and eulogies written by Abdul-Baha. Several years later, in 1919, Mirza Janabi Fazl of Tehran, Persia, with his family arrived in America. They traveled from coast to coast teaching and lecturing. We have 5 little booklets of his lectures given in Seattle, Washington. These were published by the Seattle Bahá'ís in 1921. He was a younger man than the former teachers who have visited the United States, but he was a fine speaker. He was well liked by those of the friends who knew and associated with him. Mirza Janabi Fazl visited America a second time. What does Janabi mean, Amira?
Janab, you say it like a sir, or
Okay.
it's like for respect before the name, they say.
Visited America a second time in 1923 on invitation from the believers. He contributed much to our understanding of the faith in those days, following the ascension of Abdul-Baha, when it had become imperative for us to realize the true nature of the Baha'i administrative order. This teacher had been sent by Abdul-Baha, whose tablets referring to him conveyed high praise of his spiritual capacity. Preceding his second visit, Mirza Abul-Fazl spent a number of days with Shoghi Effendi in Haifa, and his travels through America gave the believers a clearer insight into the unique station which the Master created in the guardianship. This second visit was notable also in that it greatly strengthened the National Teaching Committee, which arranged all the details of his schedule and published a news bulletin reporting his meetings and activities. These matured souls freely shared their knowledge and their experience in no other manner under the conditions prevailing in those stages of our development. Could the American Baha'i community have received such inspiration and impetus and been bound by such ties to the believers of the Orient and one universal faith? So it was so we should have another paragraph. That should have been the end, sorry. So paragraph 23, let's see, 23 continue. Suffice it to say that at this stage of its evolution, the activities of an invincible faith had assumed such dimensions as to force, on the one hand, its enemies to devise fresh weapons for their projected assaults, and on the other, to encourage its supreme promoter to instruct its followers through qualified representatives and teachers and the rudiments of an administration which, as it evolved, would at once incarnate, safeguard, and foster its spirit. The works of such stubborn assailants as those of Balchowski, Wilson, Jessup, and Richardson vie with one another in their futile attempts to stain its purity, to arrest its march, and to compel its surrender. To the charges of nihilism, of heresy, of Mohammedan Gnosticism, of immorality, of occultism, and communism so freely leveled against them, the undismayed victims of such outrageous denunciations, acting under the instructions of Abdul-Baha, retorted by initiating a series of activities which by their very nature were to be the precursors of permanent, officially recognized administrative institutions. The inauguration of Chicago's first House of Spirituality, designated by Abdul-Baha as that city's House of Justice, the establishment of the Baha'i Publishing Society, the founding of the Greenacre Fellowship, the publication of the Star of the West, the holding of the first Baha'i National Convention, synchronizing with the transference of the sacred remains of the Bab to its final resting place on Mount Carmel, the incorporation of the Baha'i Temple unity, and the formation of the executive committee of the Mashriq Asghar. These stand out as the most conspicuous accomplishments of the American believers, which have immortalized the memory of the most turbulent period of their history, launched through these very acts into the troublesome seas of ceaseless tribulation, piloted by the mighty arm of Abdul-Baha and manned by the bold initiative and abundant vitality of a band of sorely tired disciples. The Ark of Baha'u'llah's covenant has, ever since those days, been steadily pursuing its course, contemptuous of the storms of bitter misfortune that have raged, and which must continue to assail it as it forges ahead towards the promised haven of undisturbed security and peace. So I'm curious, Scott. It seems like must continue to excel it as it forges ahead towards the promised haven of undisturbed security and peace. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Baha'i community is out of the storm, does it?
No. I have to give those people that stayed around, during those early times. Imagine if you're the person who taught you about the Baha'i faith or this new faith from a different country, then decides that he wants to take ownership of America, leadership of America. And it's going to be really a big test. Those people had to stick around, and some that didn't, that were taken by the person and not by the word, had to fall by the wayside. And we have to look at ourselves now to say how many of us are, when we're talking about racial unity, some people aren't going to be able to do that, and they're going to fall by the wayside. We're all tested in different ways, and so were these young individuals, 100, 110, 120 years ago.
Well, and it's something because it's like the materials and the teachings and the writings were being compiled and collated and coalesced at this time. So it's not like they had the internet either.
Right.
It's wild. We have the internet. And so it's like we can look directly at the writings ourselves now.
Many of them had come from a Christian background where they had a huge Bible, and they're used to seeing page after page after page of something that was written in their language, in their English language. And here they're changing their loyalty, their love for a new messenger of God. But in many ways, they couldn't read many of the thousands of pages of material. That's a lot of faith.
So this is about Stoyan Krzysztof Waltrowski, 1899. A series of talks was delivered by Waltrowski, a Harvard-educated Bulgarian Christian in a church in Kenosha, attacking the teachings of the truth knowers. As the early Baha'is were known, he had been commissioned by the Baptist, Methodist, and Congregational churches to expose the new faith as false. About this time, the Baha'i population of Kenosha had grown to about 2% of the population. Interested to know what the total size of that population was now.
It's just Kenosha is about 2 hours from me in Wisconsin, and I've been interested since I heard from Hassan that this is that some of the first attacks occurred in Wisconsin. I just moved here a year ago, and am interested in learning about this. So I'll do some search. I'm glad we got this one here.
Yeah, see if you can find out the total population of Kenosha at that time.
Okay.
That'd be interesting. Published in the American Journal of Theology for January 1902 and entitled Mohammedan Gnosticism in America, the Origin, Character, and Esoteric Doctrines of the Truth Knowers.
in the article writes as follows: Ibrahim Harallah, the propagandist of the sect, claims to have converted 2,000 Americans in the space of 2 years. How far this boast is true, I am unable in every particular to verify, but there is no room to doubt that the man has had incredible success. I have personally seen large, well-organized congregations of his converts both in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and in Chicago. I have also reasons to believe the claims that similarly growing assemblies are holding their secret meetings in every large city of the United States. This is the more remarkable when we recall the fact that never before in the history of the world has a Mohammedan sect taken root among a Christian people without the aid of the sword. I believe it would not have happened today had it come bearing its own proper name, flying its own native colors. It has succeeded because, like a counterfeit coin, it has passed for what it is not. Most of the converts hardly realize what they have embraced and whither they are drifting. I consider it a duty, therefore, to tell the American people what I know of this sect and mysterious sect, and what are its origin, character, and purposes. This is quoted from materials from the study of the Bahá'í religion by E.G. Grant. Samuel Graham Wilson, who lived 32 years in Persia, published his Bahá'ísm and its claims in 1915. So I'll try and read this. After more than 30 years of experience in Persia as a Christian missionary, and after an extended study of Bahá'ísm, both in the Orient and in the Occident, Dr. Wilson writes with considerable conviction of the bombastic and false claims of this faith. He shows how the roots of Bahá'ísm reach back especially into Mohammedanism and Bahá'ísm, how chameleon-like the propagandists of this movement really are, claiming as they do to accept the best in all religions as their own, but also insisting that their own faith is the fulfillment of all past systems and therefore the only universal religion worthy of consideration today. The Bab, Baha'u'llah, and Abdul-Baha, respectively, the John the Baptist, the God, and the Jesus Christ of Bahá'ísm are exposed as crafty Farkers. I don't know. Fakirs?
Fakirs?
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I have to look it up.
What did he say?
It's a Muslim or loosely a Hindu religious ascetic who lives solely on alms.
Fakir.
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 Their claims to divinity are ridiculed in light of their actual careers, which present a series of incidents hardly befitting God's and Christ's.
Here.
Dr. Wilson shows also that while in America and Europe, this sect pretends to exalt womanhood and claims to teach a morality superior even to Christian ethics, yet in fact, its very leaders have given the lie to such statements. The whole Bahá'í movement, therefore, is denounced as an insidious fabrication of selfish and cunning men. It claims to millions of followers are shown to be false. The history of the sect in Chicago is given in evidence of the comparatively low order of life which Baha'is
really represent. One wonders, however, whether Dr. Wilson does not sometimes quite naively countenance the use of the very same arguments and methods of propaganda in Christianity, which he denounces so warmly in another religion. Wow. It's really sad. Like, I'd hate, I guess it's no different than pretty much anyone going on social media today. Honestly. Reverend Jessup attacked the Baha'i faith in an article he wrote titled "The Bahá'ís," published in the Outlook, New York, 22nd June, 1901. Honestly, anyone else want to read? Can you read that?
Nah, not with my eyes right now. Sorry.
All right, I'll try. In the summer of 1897, an aged Persian sheikh came to the American press in Beirut, bringing a large sheet of pasteboard on which he wished a map to be mounted. On one side, it was glazed with black varnish and had inscribed on it in elegant Persian script in gold letters in Arabic words, Ya Baha'u'llah, O glory of the most glorious. The Baha'i motto. Our clerk, perceiving this, asked the sheikh for the card, and he said that he would mount the map on a new and better one. That Baha motto now hangs in my study. The old sheikh said in explanation of his scheme of mounting a map on the face of this beautiful motto, I have had this hanging on the wall of my room and prayed to it for 12 years and found it to be vanity and worthless. I now prefer to read the Bible. Ever since the first Baha'i reform movement in Persia in 1845, the Christian world has hoped that some of its liberal tenets might lead the Persian people to Christianity. But this, far from the hope, has not been realized. Those who read the Bible seem to prefer to find an occult inner double meaning in the simplest language and construct for themselves a kind of mystic religious philosophy in which the Persians delight. According to the best authorities, Bahá'ísm arose as follows. From Mirza Ali Muhammad appeared in Shiraz in 1845, a pupil of Sheikh Ahmad Din, who taught a mixture of Sufism, mystic philosophy, and Muslim Shiite law, and said that the absent Mahdi, now in a spiritual world called Jabaka and Jabarsa would soon appear, and that he was the Bab or door of the Mahdi. He then made up a system composed of Muslim, Nuri, Shia, Jewish, and heathen doctrines, and then claimed to be the Bab Eden, and afterwards the Nakuta or sinner and creator of truth. And then that he was deity personified. Then that he was the Prophet Muhammad, and produced a new book called the Bayan, which is the Baha'i Bible, in 20,000 verses, Arabic and Persian. Complaint was made of its bad grammar and that this is a sign of imperfection. He explained that the ungrammatical Arabic, by the fact that the words and letters rebelled and sinned in a previous world, then transmigrated to this world, and as punishment for sin in a previous existence were put under grammatical rules. but he in mercy forgave all. Wow. Like, I can't imagine like trying to understand this back then, right? You know, if you're sitting there, you're trying to learn, or you're hearing about the Baha'i faith for the first time, you're hearing about Baha'u'llah, about the Baha, and then this is some of the stuff that is like the only thing you have access to.
Right.
Robert P. Richardson, an American Protestant missionary, published articles attacking the Baha'i faith in the Outlook and the Muslim world. In 1932, the London Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge published his books, The Religion of the Baha'is, The Persian Revival to Jesus and His American Disciples, History and Teachings of the Babi and Baha'i Religions and Contemporary American Disagreements from an Unsympathetic Outsider's Perspective, Precursor, the Prophet and the Pope, The Contributions to the History of the Baha'i Movement, Part 1, and Precursor, the Prophet and the Pope, The Contributions to the History of the Baha'i Movement, Conclusion. A critical overview of Babi history, contemporary American Baha'i issues and disagreements, parallel, and Baha'i objections to the author's previous writings. The rise and fall of the Parliament of Religions at Greenacre, background of the first Parliament in Chicago, Columbian Exposition, and the role of Sarah Farmer and other Baha'is in bringing it to fruition. Written by an unsympathetic outsider's perspective. Interesting. House of Justice, the forerunner of the future local House of Justice established around the Baha'i world, are currently designated local spiritual assembly. Baha'u'llah called for the creation of these consultative councils in each city in his most holy book. The Lord hath ordained that in every city a house of justice be established, wherein shall gather counselors to the number of Baha, and should it exceed this number, it does not matter. They should consider themselves as entering the court of the presence of God, exalted the Most High, and as beholding him who is the unseen. It behooveth them to be the trusted ones of the merciful among men, and to regard themselves as the guardians appointed of God for all that dwell on earth. It is incumbent upon them to take counsel together and to have regard for the interests of the servants of God, for his sake, even as they regard their own interests, and to choose that which is meet and seemly. Thus hath the Lord your God, the gracious, the pardoner, commanded you. Beware lest you put away that which is clearly revealed in his tablet. Fear God, O ye that perceive. Like, you truly have access to an unlimited wealth of knowledge today that has never happened in religious history. And there's truly no excuse or reason not to investigate once you're told of it. You should definitely fear God, O ye that perceive. All right. Can you read this, Scott?
I can read that. It's a little bigger for me. In the America's most great peace, the House of Justice. In the early days of the Baha'is in America, a number of cities applied the designation, quote, House of Justice, unquote, to their consultative councils. Abdul-Baha sent a tablet asking them to name those bodies houses of spirituality instead. In it, I'm guessing this is a letter that he wrote. O ye who are firm in the covenant, the report of the spiritual gathering, which is dated such and such, and sent by you was received, and its contents were a source of great fragrance and spirituality. I was glad to read the names of the revered members. The signature of that meeting should be the spiritual gathering or house of spirituality. And the wisdom therein is that hereafter the government should not infer from the term house of justice that a court is signified, that it is connected with political affairs, or that at any time it will interfere with governmental affairs. Hereafter, enemies will be many. They would use this subject as a cause for disturbing the minds of the government and confusing the thoughts of the public. The intention was to make known that by the term spiritual gathering, or the house of spirituality, that gathering has not the least connection with material matters, and that its whole aim and consultation is confined to matters connected with spiritual affairs. This was also instructed in all of Persia from the tablets of Abdul-Baha. Sandra, you want to talk or read?
Local and secondary houses of justice are, for the present, known as local spiritual assemblies and national spiritual assemblies. Shoghi Effendi has indicated that this is a temporary appellation, which, as the position and aims of the Baha'i faith are better understood and more fully recognized, will gradually be superseded by the permanent and more appropriate designation of House of Justice. Oh. Not only will the present-day spiritual assemblies be styled differently in future, but they will be enabled also to add to their present functions those powers, duties, and prerogatives necessitated by the recognition of the faith of Baha'u'llah, not merely as one of the recognized religious systems of the world, but as the state religion of an independent and sovereign power. Wow.
Hold on. That's the first time I've actually read a direct.
I'd never seen that either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's in the Kitab Yaqdas.
49.
Yeah, that's not going to happen in our lifetime, at least.
No.
But that's the neat part about it. There's a different, we're standing on other people's shoulders, and other people are standing on our shoulders in the future.
The one thing that I tell people about the faith is that it gives you hope.
Yeah.
Everything I read gives you hope for the future.
In connection with the important step that has been taken for the eventual inclusion of Greenacre Fellowship within the orbit of the activities of the American National Spiritual Assembly, I hope and pray that this new privilege and added responsibility will prove highly beneficial in its results, both to Greenacre itself and the general interests of the cause in America. In a separate communication addressed to the chairman of the said fellowship, our dearly beloved and self-sacrificing brother, Mr. W. Randall, I will express my warm approval of this constructive step and my ardent hopes for the quicker unfolding and fuller expansion under the fostering care of the National Spiritual Assembly of Greenacre's unique and sublime mission in life. I shall follow in this connection with the keenest interest the course of your activities in accordance with the policy outlined in your letter of October 14th, and feel that the greatest stress must be laid upon the necessity of exemplifying in a most liberal and practical manner the driving power hidden in this divine revelation, rather than upon the idle reiteration of a set of principles, however exalted and unique in their character. May the national fund so flourish as to enable its trustees to undertake such measures as will eloquently testify to a sorely stricken humanity the healing power of God's faith. And this is Shoghi Effendi in Baha'i News, number 10, February 1926. This is Sarah Farmer, 1847 to 1916. Sarah Farmer put her property at the disposal of the faith after her 1900 visit to Abdul-Baha. In 1912, the master spoke 4 times at Greenacre. In 1925, the NSA in the USA and Canada was elected at Greenacre. The Baha'i Summer School was established at Greenacre in 1929. Interesting history. Yeah, there it is. Back then, today.
Oh.
This is Mirza Abu Fazl at Greenacre. From left to right, you have, so from, that's Horace Holly, or no, that's left. Fazl. No, I don't see him in here. Janabi Fazl. Or Faisal. Someone else. Louis Gregory. Siegfried.
Yeah.
Schoeffer. So that's Siegfried. In front of the Iranian Hall at Greenacre, Elliott, Maine. It's a nice campus. Ever been, Scott?
No, I've stayed in the Midwest.
Yeah, it's not that far from you though. You're a lot closer to it than I am technically.
Yeah.
Okay, Star of the West succeeded the earliest American Baha'i periodical, the Baha'i Bulletin, 1909 to 1910, and 1910, and continued publication to 1935 when it was replaced by World Order magazine, 1935 to 1949. Star of the West, named by Abdul-Baha, was published in Chicago and became the most important international Baha'i publication of its time. Star of the West was a U.S. Baha'i newsletter published between 1910 and 1935. It was one of the only ways for the Western friends to receive tablets and news about the Baha'i faith at that time, and contains many translations of tablets and communications which have to date not been published anywhere else. The first volume of Star of the West was published under the title of Baha'i News. First Baha'i National Convention, synchronizing with the transference of the sacred remains of the Bab. Baha'i Temple Unity in 1909 grew out of the need for administrative oversight to construct the first Baha'i house of worship in North America. This national body would, in time, evolve to become, in 1926, the first National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States and Canada. The two countries have elected in their respective national assemblies since they separated in 1948. So, yeah, now they have separate assemblies, right?
Right.
And does Alaska have its own, or is it?
Yeah, so does Hawaii. Hawaii does.
Has their own as well?
Right.
Interesting.
No one asked me.
Hey, well, you know, that state religion, right? It's going to be different. It's not going to be according to the 50 contiguous states or the 48 contiguous.
Sure.
Okay. We have delegates and others attending the convention in 1909. So you have Thornton Chase. So that's Thornton Chase. And then you have Bryn True. Then you have Harry Randall. That's Harry Randall. And then you have John Bosch. Where's Bosch? There he is, Mr. Bosch. And then we have Howard McNutt. And then Dr. Susan Moody. And we have Arthur Agnew, which is shit. And then Charles Mason Remy and Dr. Edward Gibson. Right here. Interesting. And the only one that became a covenant breaker was Remy, right?
Right. Yep.
The Baha'is of Mandalay, Burma, with a marble casket offered by them for the remains of the Bab. Oh, is this his casket?
Right. Yeah, sarcophagus. Yep.
Wow.
Talk about heritage there.
Yeah. On the morning of March 21st, 1909, the day of Nowruz, Abdul-Baha had the marble sarcophagus, gift of the Baha'is of Rangoon, carried up the mountain and placed in the vault. That evening, he laid in the sarcophagus the wooden casket which contained the inseparable remains of the Bab and the disciple who had died with him. A solitary lamp lit the scene, so potent, and yet so exultant. The Bab had been cruelly maligned, cruelly wronged, cruelly put to death. His torn and smashed body had had no home for many long years. Now the heart of Carmel was receiving it forevermore. Of this event, Zechariah had written, "Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, Behold the man whose name is the branch, and he shall go up out of his palace, and he shall build the temple of the Lord." How mysteriously and indubitably had his prophecy come true. The branch had built the temple of the Lord, had raised his tabernacle on his mountain, on Carmel, the mountain of God. This is from Aluzi, Abdul-Baha, the center of the covenant. It's amazing. The opening of the first American Baha'i Convention in Chicago, it was attended by 39 delegates from 36 cities. The Baha'i Temple Unity was incorporated to hold title to the temple property and to provide for its construction. At the same time convention, a constitution was framed and the executive board of the Baha'i Temple Unity was elected. The Baha'i Temple Unity was superseded in 1925 by the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States and Canada. You have Albert Hall, president of Baha'i Temple Unity and chairman of the annual convention of the Baha'is of the United States and Canada, 1910 to 1914. The 19 disciples were chosen by Shoghi Effendi and are pictured and identified on pages 84 and 85 of the Baha'i World Volume 3, April 1928 to April 1930. We have 1, John Ebenezer Iselmont. Then we have James Brown Thornton Chase. We have Howard McNutt, Sarah Jane Farmer. We have Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney is here. Lillian Francis Capps. Here you have Robert Turner. You have Dr. Arthur Edward Heinrich Baum. He is here. William Henry Harry Randall. Right here. Louisa Aura Lua Getzinger. 10. Yeah. Joseph H. Heinen. Dr. Chester Ira Thatcher. Isabella de Brittingham. Mary Virginia Thornburg Cropper. Or is that? No, right here. And then Helen S. Goodall is right here. And then Arthur Pillsbury Dodge. And then William H. Harr. And then Dr. George Jacob Auger. Wow, interesting. So there were 19 disciples, huh? All right, this is review of paragraph 24. Unsatisfied with the achievements which crown the concerted efforts of their elected representatives within the American continent and emboldened by the initial success of their pioneer teachers beyond its confines in Great Britain, France, and Germany, the community of the American believers resolved to win in distant climes fresh recruits to the advancing army of Baha'u'llah. Setting out from the western shores of their native land and impelled by an indomitable energy of a newborn faith, these itinerant teachers of the gospel of Baha'u'llah pushed on towards the islands of the Pacific and as far as China and Japan, determined to establish beyond the furthest seas the outposts of their beloved faith. Both at home and abroad, this community had by that time demonstrated its capacity to widen the range and consolidate the foundations of its vast endeavors. The angry voices that had been raised in protest against its rise were being drowned amid the acclamations with which the East greeted its recent victories. Those ugly features that had loomed so threateningly were gradually receding into the distance, furnishing a still wider field to these noble warriors for their exercise of their talent or of their latent energies. The faith of Baha'u'llah in the continent of America had indeed been resuscitated. Phoenix-like, it had risen in all of its freshness, vigor, and beauty, and was now, through the voice of its triumphant exponents, incessantly calling to Abdul-Baha, imploring him to undertake a journey to its shores. The first fruit of the mission entrusted to its worthy upholder had lent such potency that their call that Abdul-Baha, who had just been delivered from the fetters of a galling tyranny, found himself unable to resist. His incomparable love for his own favored children impelled him to respond. Their passionate entreaty had, moreover, been reinforced by the numerous invitations which representatives of various interested organizations, whether religious, educational, or humanitarian, had extended to him, expressing their eagerness to receive from his own mouth an exposition of his father's teachings. So this is all about getting Abdul-Baha to come. Though bent with age, though suffering from ailments resulting from the accumulated cares of 50 years of exile and captivity, Abdul-Baha set out on his memorable journey across the seas to the land where he might bless
by his presence and sanctify through his deeds the mighty acts his spirit had led his disciples to perform. The circumstances that have attended his triumphal progress through the chief cities of the United States and Canada my pen is utterly incapable of describing the joys with which the announcement of his arrival evoked, the publicity which his activities created, the forces which his utterances released, the opposition which the implications of his teachings excited, the significant episodes to which his words and deeds continually gave rise. These future generations will no doubt minutely and beneficially register. They will carefully delineate their features, will cherish and preserve their memory, and will transmit unimpaired the record of their minutest details to their descendants. It would indeed be presumptuous on our part to attempt at the present time to sketch even the bare outline of so vast, so enthralling a theme. And Promulgation of Universal Peace is an incredible story. Compilation of all of his talks. So that, and we don't know if it's still to look and see. If it's not, I'll have to figure out how to. Yeah, it's still up. It's called centenary.baha'i.us. And that has pretty much that entire book. So if you haven't seen that, Scott, you should go through and check it out. I'll put it in the chat. It's really. Okay, and the last one. The seeds which Abdul-Baha's ceaseless activities so lavishly scattered had endowed the United States and Canada, nay, the entire continent, with potentialities such as it had never known in its history. On the small band of his trained and beloved disciples, and through them on their descendants, he, through that visit, had bequeathed a priceless heritage, a heritage which carried with it the sacred and primary obligation to arise and carry on in that fertile field the work he had so gloriously initiated. We can dimly picture to ourselves the wishes that must have welled from his eager heart as he bade his last farewell to that promising country. An inscrutable wisdom. We can well imagine him remark to his disciples on the eve of his departure, has in his infinite bounty singled out your native land for the execution of a mighty purpose through the agency of Baha'u'llah's covenant. I, as the plowman, have been called upon since the beginning of my ministry to turn up and break its ground. The mighty confirmations that have, in the opening days of your career, rained upon you, have prepared and invigorated its soil. The tribulations you subsequently were made to suffer have driven deep furrows into the field which my hands had prepared. Wow. I mean, that's amazing. So, okay, this is it. This is the last, well, it's the last paragraph, just continued. So would you like to read it, Scott?
Sure. And in the interesting part, I've had a job in agriculture. So this idea of tilling the soil and planting seeds have always hit me well. It works well. A lot of analogies. The seeds with which I have been entrusted I have now scattered far and wide before you, under your loving care, by your ceaseless exertions. Every one of these seeds must germinate. Every one must yield its destined fruit. A winter of unprecedented severity will soon be upon you. Its storm clouds are fast gathering on the horizon. Tempestuous winds will assail you from every side. The light of the covenant will be obscured through my departure. These mighty blasts, this wintry desolation shall, however, pass away. The dormant seed will burst into fresh activity. It shall put forth its buds, shall reveal in mighty institutions its leaves and blossoms. The vernal showers which the tender mercies of my heavenly Father will cause to descend upon you will enable this tender plant to spread out its branches to regions far beyond the confines of your native land. And finally, the steadily mounting sun of his revelation, shining in its meridian splendor, will enable this mighty tree of his faith to yield in the fullness of time and on your soil its golden fruit. Yeah.
You know, Scott, I'm constantly reminded every time I actually take the time to read the writings about, like, there's quite literally nothing else in the world that makes me as hopeful and as happy as reading the writings. And it's amazing how easily I can take it for granted as well. But it's just like, it's when you sit down and you read them again that you just, when you compare it against everything else in the world today, there's no comparison. It's amazing.
And that's what we need to be looking at instead of being caught up in arguments about this or that. You know, it's very easy to go outside and read a billboard or listen to a radio thing and not even mean it, or pick up a newspaper and you're upset.
I know.
You can be. We can allow ourselves to do that.
Well, we should be, because there's 10 million other people that have looked at this exact same thing and they're all upset about it. Yeah. Then you get here and you just read this and you're like, wow, it's amazing how, in the grand scheme of the future of humanity, how irrelevant what the world considers to be so paramount is at this moment. It's amazing.
And it really, that second sentence, under your loving care, you know, I think sometimes I've put that down, that, oh, that's a nice comment or something, but we don't, how do we put that together into a daily, every time we meet in a Baha'i meeting or meeting with any of our neighbors or friends, how do we become that loving person? That loving care, and think of these people that we meet, relatives or neighbors, or for maybe just one-time people that we'll meet, give them an opportunity to we treat that seed with a gentleness and a tenderness, seeing that they may be the next Mirza Abul Fazl. You know, maybe they won't be of today. You know, we don't know who that person is. It may be our neighbor or someone we run into to take things on. So we have to be very loving and wise.
Well, that concludes today's. Would you like to read the prayer to close out with the prayer? Can you see it?
No, I don't see it. If you had, I will. Okay. The Baha'i, For the southern states?
Yes.
Okay. Oh my God, thou seest many in my lowliness and weakness, occupied with the greatest undertaking, determined to raise thy word among the masses and to spread thy teachings among thy peoples. How can I succeed unless thou assist me with the breath of the Holy Spirit? Help me to triumph by the hosts of thy glorious kingdom and shower upon me thy confirmations, which alone can change a gnat into an eagle, a drop of water into rivers and seas, and an atom into lights and suns. O my Lord, assist me with thy triumphant and effective might, so that my tongue may utter thy praises and attributes among all people, and my soul overflow with the wine of thy love and knowledge. Thou art the omnipotent and the doer of whatsoever thou willest.
Thanks, Scott.
No problem. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
doing
everyone
good.
else. All right. You guys have a good afternoon. See you next week.